So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, the solar, battery, and heat pump tax credits are alive and well. In spite of changes that are going on in the District of Columbia and our federal government, today's show is going to talk about how you can get your tax year 24 tax credits for these technologies, and that's something that you're going to have to apply for this year in 2025. And we'll also give you some advice for getting these same tax credits in 2025. So if you haven't put in a solar or a battery, a heat pump system, things like that yet, you can still get those tax credits next year, but they'll apply for this tax year in 2025. Plus, we're going to talk a little bit about the easy-to-get rebates for heat pump HVAC and heat pump water heaters that are available through your local utility CCA. Now, first disclosure, we're not tax experts, so please work directly with your tax professional to go through all the forms when you file for these credits. And it's really pretty much only one form, so it's not too complicated. All right, here we go with the electrification tax credit summary. There's a 30% tax credit for solar electric property. That used to be called the ITC, or the investment tax credit. Now they call it the residential clean energy credit. The same tax credit, 30% tax credit for solar water heating, not pool systems, but solar domestic hot water. A 30% tax credit for battery storage property, battery storage systems over 3 kilowatt hours. 3 kilowatt hours is a tiny little battery, so even Enphase as small as 3.3 kilowatt hour battery qualifies. There's a 30% tax credit with a maximum $600 per year for electric panel and circuit upgrades. But there's no cap if you're doing these electric panel and circuit upgrades and electric service upgrades as part of a solar and battery system installation. So many of our customers are upgrading their 100 amp panels to a 200 amp panel. They're upgrading their panel. They're upgrading their service. They may spend like $7,000 or $8,000 on that. Well, you get a 30% tax credit on that because it's done as part of solar. All right, now here's a couple of others about specifically heating and cooling equipment. There's a 30% tax credit with a $2,000 maximum per year for heat pump HVAC systems and heat pump water systems. So you probably want to do them in different years, so you get that $2,000. Heck, get one done in December, get one done in January, you're fine. And then there's a 30% tax credit with a $1,000 maximum for home EV charger installations in non-urban census tracts. So there's some rules that your tax accountant's going to help you figure out. Now, these residential energy credits are all done as part of IRS Form 5695. So, you go into Google, you say IRS Form 5695. It's a really easy form, easy in IRS terms. It's pretty straightforward. And it's the same form that you use for the residential clean energy credit and the energy efficiency home improvement credit. So it's all part of one form. Your accountant's probably going to be pretty familiar with it. And so you can do it within QuickBooks. You can have your accountant do it. Not really that complicated. Okay, now there's some deadlines that you have to be conscious of. If you completed the installation of any of these electrification equipment, solar, batteries, heat pumps, electrical upgrades last year in 2024, obviously you're going to file for those credits in 2025. Usually April 15th is the deadline unless you're on an extension. If you're going to do this work in 2025 this year, then you're going to file for your tax credit in 2026. And that's kind of what's cool about it is we know for sure that the 2025 credits are going to be in place. Now, if you're waiting until 2026 to do any of your installation work, solar, batteries, heat pumps, things like that, candidly, the status of the tax credits as of now are uncertain because there's a lot of changes going on in Washington, D.C. with regards to our tax system. So they're talking about possibly removing some of these clean energy, global warming, climate change credits. I'm using all those words that you're not supposed to, but I don't care. They may change the rules for 2026. They can't change the rules for 2025. All right. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now, there's something else that just kind of cropped up that we learned about as a result of working with a lot of our older customers. And we've been in business a long time, and even systems that were installed 2, 3, 4 years ago, people are coming to us with questions. And even for some people that had a different installer that's no longer answering the phone, we're helping out. This was a surprise. The IRS is the new climate change sheriff in town. I'm not supposed to use the word climate change, but I'm going to use it anyway because that's what's happening. Here's what the IRS is occasionally doing. I have no idea what the statistics, but it was probably a dozen customers or so for us that were audited by the IRA just for their solar system tax credits. And basically the IRS said we need to get a written, signed letter from each of the manufacturers whose equipment that you have listed on your invoice for the solar and the battery system to make sure that the manufacturers testify in writing that their equipment is eligible for the tax credit. Kind of a pain in the neck. Now, all of the current manufacturers, no problem. We got everything except for a couple of solar module companies that aren't that active anymore. But we did get these letters. It's from the IRS. It's all on our website. It's also on California Solar and Storage Association website that the tax credits apply. Now, the reason why this is important is if your installer's not answering the phone, or if you've got some crazy equipment, or if you install something perhaps that's used that's no longer applicable for the credit, you may not have a problem. But obviously, as long as your installation follows all of the rules exactly and make sure that your installer has accurate product and accounting records, you'll never have a problem. So this was pretty straightforward. You get help from your installer, but I just want to point out that you want to make sure that you're installing equipment that is eligible for the tax credits. Now, we experienced this for solar and battery installations. They wanted to know the manufacturer of the solar panels. They wanted to know the manufacturer of the inverter. They wanted to know the manufacturer of the racking system. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the future the IRS is asking for the manufacturers and details on the HVAC equipment, the heat pump equipment that you're putting in. So just make sure that your installer's comfortable with that and that they have those records, and you're buying something that's mainstream product and not something that may not have that kind of documentation that you need. Now, when it comes to electrification, there are a few contractors in the country that kind of do the whole electrification thing for customers under one roof, a one-stop shop. That's what Systems Energy Systems does. We do the solar, we do the battery, we do the electrical upgrades, we do the heat pumps, we do the heat pump water heaters, things like that. And what you may ask is, gee, how does this all fit together? What's the whole menu of credits that I can get? So here's an example of the tax credits eligible for each component of an electrification project. And sorry for the complicated eye chart, but I thought it would be easier just to show this chart. You can kind of dig into it a little bit more and see how the 30% applies, how the 600 maximums apply, how the different tax credits apply. Now, we haven't included in here the local rebates, and that adds another $2,000 or $3,000 of juice for each technology, but it's pretty interesting to see. So, for example, in this case, the solar was $30,000. The residential clean energy credit was 30% of that, or $9,000. The battery storage system, I just came up with a number, $27,847. That might have been for 2 batteries. The customer got $8,354 tax credit. Once again, 30%. There were electrical upgrades related to this. So maybe some new electrical panels that were able to handle an essential loads panel. The customer got a $900 tax credit on that. There was a heat pump HVAC system installed, and just kind of a average price for a normal size home, $30,000 for this heat pump HVAC system. There's a $2,000 energy efficiency home improvement credit, and that's why it's a $2,000 maximum. So even though the credit is 30%, you're never going to get a heat pump that's going to be only a few $1,000s. They're expensive. Next, heat pump water heater. This is a replacement of an existing gas hot water heater. So that heat pump water heater, once again, $8,000. The reason why the heat pump water heaters are more expensive than you'd expect is because in order to get the tax credit, you have to get a building permit. In order to get a building permit, you need to make sure that your whole system is fully updated to the current codes. And what we're finding is pretty much all of our customers need to do a bunch of other little things around their hot water system, putting in an expansion tank, putting in mixing valves, things like that. If you do it without a permit, It's going to be cheaper, but then if you ever get audited, you're not going to have a building permit that proved that you put it in. And so it's kind of always good to just bring everything up to code at the same time. So for that $8,000 heat pump water heater, there's a $2,000 federal tax credit. And also keep in mind for the heat pump water heater, heat pump HVAC, there's also local rebates. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right. Now, for the electrical panel, the service upgrade that's related to installing a solar and battery system. This is really common. Somebody has a 100 amp electrical service. They want to put in a 200 amp service. They may need to run some new overhead wires. They may need to put in a new electrical panel. So in this case, a new electrical panel was installed for $8,500. So there's a $2,550 tax credit for that. In addition, so now we talked about these are the things that are related to solar. There are also electrical efficiency upgrade credits, lights, wiring, controls, things like that. There's a $600 cap on that, but it's part of the same 5695 form, so you might as well have your accountant fill it out, get another $600 there. And there's a $600 cap. You can do that once a year. The EV charger, there's a $1,000 maximum rebate in order to pay for the charger and all the wiring and getting the permit. It kind of drives me crazy that you can buy a cheap charger for $600 or $700, but the building permit alone could be $300, and then there's a bunch of electrical work to make sure that everything's done to code. So it's not a $500 installation; it's more like $3,000, and then so that incentive's about $1,000. So these things really have a tendency to add up. And I want to point out that the energy efficiency home improvement credits can be taken annually for each category. Everything that's related to the clean energy credit, the solar credits, you can add onto your system that year, the next year, whatever, and you still get that 30%. Now, what's really cool is in addition to these tax credits, certain local utilities have their own rebates. And I use the term utility loosely when it comes to Silicon Valley, because here in Silicon Valley, they have this thing called community choice aggregation utilities. These are little groups that are based on, a number of different cities that buy electricity on the market or contract for electricity, and they're able to buy that electricity for less than our local utility PG&E does. So it's called a community choice aggregation. You're automatically enrolled in these, and the ones that are local here are Silicon Valley Clean Energy. That's for most of the cities in Santa Clara County. Peninsula Clean Energy. That's for most of San Mateo County. And there's San Jose Clean Energy. San Francisco has their own clean energy utility. So these are very specific. If you've opted out, which you have to manually do. I don't know why people would do it because the CCAs are pretty much always a penny or so cheaper. But if you've opted out and you're getting your electricity generated by PG&E, you're not eligible for these rebates. So you want to check. And I'd say that, heck, for a few $1,000s, I'd make sure that I'm on the appropriate CCA. So here's the rebates, and they're pretty good. Up to a $2,500 rebate for heat pumps, heat pump HVAC, up to a $2,500 rebate for a heat pump water heater. And these different utilities really that we're dealing with, these CCAs, that there's 3 of them in our service territory. Sometimes the rebates are a little bit different, but they're pretty straightforward. $1,000 for electrical panel upgrades and $500 for other upgrades. So these are really good to look into. The process is not as easy as a tax credit. You need to apply for the rebate before you start construction. You need to identify the contractor that's going to do it before you start construction, and Cinnamon Energy Systems is one of those contractors. You need to have pictures of your old system. And if you've got the contractor set, you've got your application in and it's been accepted, then you can start the work. Then you're going to get these incentives. They're pretty easy to get, and it's free money. Just make sure that you're not getting your electricity generated by PG&E. All right? Now, obviously, you probably have heard about the Inflation Reduction Act rebates. They're for heat pumps. They're pretty big. I think $2,500 for a heat pump water heater, up to $8,000 for heat pump HVAC systems. Unfortunately, these rebates have some pretty strict income limitations. They're still in flux. California has these programs going. New York State has these programs going. Some other states have these programs going. But there are income restrictions, so every state kind of handles the processing differently. And I'm kind of nervous about how willing the federal government is going to be actually making these payments to the state. So you want to check very carefully to make sure that if you're going to be putting in a heat pump HVAC system and you're depending on an $8,000 IRA rebate, you want to make sure that that rebate is solid. And I would suggest you talk to your accountant about that. All right. So in conclusion, the tax credits are really easy to get. And the ones that are really relevant are the 30% residential clean energy credit. That's solar, storage, heat pumps, things like that. The 30% energy efficiency credits, and these usually have caps. They're a little bit smaller, but heck, it's free money. The local rebates from the CCAs, pretty useful, especially here in California. The IRA rebates from the DOE, they're in question. The money has been allocated to certain states, but actually we don't know how amenable the federal government is going to be at actually paying that. So get help from your contractor. Your contractor will have some pretty good information that's public. There's forms that are published on the web. And get help from your accountant because they're really going to know a little bit more specifically what's valid and what's not. So big suggestion. Get your tax credits and rebates now while they're still available. There's really good incentives for people still putting in systems in 2025. And I hope that our customers, and whether they're ours or anybody else's that installed systems last year, they're able to get those incentives also. Okay, that's all the time we have on this week's Energy Show. Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you missed any of today's show, you can always go to the Energy Show website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcast.